Hi everyone and welcome to today's lesson where we're going to look at literary genre in Brooklyn by John Crowley. Okay, as you know, literary genre looks at the techniques used by the author or the director in this case in order to make the story more compelling and for viewers, the better for viewers. Okay, so literary genre are the techniques in which the directors and writers use in order to keep viewers on their seats or to keep readers turning the pages. Okay, so in this PowerPoint, we're going to look at the key aspects of literary genre, and they are title, point of view, plot narrative pattern, creation of characters, and imagery and symbolism. So we're going to go through each of these as we go through the slides. So the title is the first thing we're going to look at. Okay, the title is taken from Colm Tóibín's novel of the same name. In the 1950s, Brooklyn was a popular choice for people emigrating. Okay, especially Irish people emigrating. Now, a lot of films are taken from book titles. They don't always follow the same. They don't always follow the same name. Sometimes directors change the name, but in this case, John Crowley decided to keep the same name, and there's a reason for that, as we'll go through. Okay, Brooklyn in some ways is as restrictive as Ireland, as Eilish tells us. I live in Brooklyn, I work in Brooklyn, and if I go out in Brooklyn. So she has the same patterns in Brooklyn that she did very much in Enniscorthy. When she goes out, she lives in a boarding house, she goes to work, she goes out, it's to Irish dances. So, and like as we'll see when we go through, it says here, Brooklyn is seen as a sort of limbo for immigrants, as shown by the men at the Christmas dinners. A person's success depends on their ability to fight for a good life, or they can keep yearning for home. The title shows us Eilish is going to have a choice to make. So if you think back to those men at the Christmas dinner and kind of how depressing and bleak it was, there was a suggestion that they yearned for home and that they never really settled. They came to work in America but didn't create new lives for themselves in the same way that Eilish is going to in this story. Okay, Eilish does have a choice to make at the end. Is she going to go back to Brooklyn, or is she going to stay in Enniscorthy? The fact that Eilish picks Brooklyn at the end gives the title special significance. Okay, point of view. So when we read The Great Gatsby and when we went through that video, we looked at the first person narrative and how we get an insight into the lives of the characters through the first person narrative. Not really possible in a film, it's more of a third person, but you will notice that the point of view that we mostly see is from Eilish. Okay, Eilish is the protagonist in the film, and almost everything we see is from her point of view. There are a few others. Tony and Rose can take centre stage at certain points, but it's generally her journey that we are travelling on. Because we follow her on her journey, we are likely to empathise with her struggle. Because of her reserved nature, it is very hard for the audience to know what Eilish is thinking, and the letters play a huge role in allowing the audience to know what is going on in Eilish's mind. Okay, the letters itself is a literary technique. Much like a playwright would use a soliloquy to let the audience know how they feel, the letters are a way of doing that in Brooklyn. Eilish doesn't confide in a lot of people. And even if she was with Rose, I don't know if she would confide her in the same way as she does in the letters. Now, she also sends a letter to her mother, but they wouldn't have the same insight as the letters to Rose. We hear in one of the letters to Rose after she has met Tony that her heart is halfway across the sea. Now, that can also be used in the imagery and symbolism about someone struggling with homesickness. At the beginning, when she was in Brooklyn, her heart was still in Enniscorthy, but because she has met Tony, her heart is now halfway across the sea, meaning she's on that journey of being accepting Brooklyn as her home. So symbolising she is now settling into life in Brooklyn. We're going to continue with point of view. We catch glimpses of life through Rose's eyes when she reads Eilish's letter on the beach, and later on at the dinner table while holding back tears as Eilish reads her letter in Brooklyn. Yeah, this is done really well. Eilish is reading Rose's letter in Brooklyn, and we're looking at Rose at the same time at the kitchen table. And she's holding back tears, and there's a sense of foreshadowing going on here, as if we kind of sense something's wrong. And when Eilish says these words, they're not her words, they're Rose's words. You know I'm by your side even when I'm not. So this foreshadows her death and makes the audience aware that something is wrong. There's a sense of dramatic irony here too, because we kind of get a sense that something is wrong long before Eilish gets a sense that something is wrong. Eilish was totally stunned by this. She didn't know anything was wrong. These glimpses of Rose's life show what a loving and selfless person she is. who does everything in her power to create a happy life for her sister. Okay, in all the texts we've studied, from The Great Gatsby, A Doll's House in Brooklyn, Rose is probably the most altruistic character that we meet along the way. Everything she does is selfless. In fact, what she does for Eilish actually hurts her more, because she's losing her one confidant, and knowing that she was sick, she could have made it about herself, but she didn't. She made it her ambition in life before she died to create a better life for Eilish, and she does that with, and there was nothing for her in that except seeing her sister achieve success. The other point of view we're given is when a worried Tony gets his brother to write a letter for him. We feel sympathy for Tony here because he's cut off from Eilish in Ireland and no one is aware of his existence. Now, we have empathy here for him as well, because he's acknowledging his limitations, I suppose, educationally, in the fact that he has to ask his 10-year-old brother for help to write a letter. And that adds further empathy from us, because he's accepting his own limitations. He realises, and it must be a very, very tough thing to do, to ask a 10-year-old brother to write basically a love letter for you, and knowing how awkward that is. And I suppose there's a sense of humour there as well, but we do feel sorry for Tony at that point, because he's totally cut off, and Eilish is kind of, suppose, living the high life in Ireland at that time. And I suppose as well, we're kind of thinking, is he going to get left behind? And it's those kind of questions that are central to the director's role in creating tension and building up mystery and intrigue. Okay, the different points of view gives us a great insight into the lives of the characters. Okay, plot, narrative, pattern. Okay, so the story of the film is linear and is told in chronological order. So it's different. A Doll's House and The Great Gatsby are told in kind of a series of flashbacks, and even Nora in A Doll's House, the story of her loan happens beforehand. Everything we find out in this story has happened in a linear fashion. It's start to finish. It shows the challenges that Eilish faces in making a new life in Brooklyn, and then the internal conflict in picking between Ireland and America at the end. Okay, so conflict is central to all stories, and all three stories we have done, there are conflict, but there is external conflict, which we see, and there's internal conflict. So it's a choice that Eilish has to make. There's no external factors, and it's an internal conflict. She's basically fighting with herself in many ways. Now, this is very important when we look at narrative pattern. The director uses parallel scenes to show the development of Eilish's character in the film. For example, the two beach scenes show how confident she has become in a short space of time. So the parallel scenes are showing two scenes in close proximity where people are very different. One of the first times I suppose I've come across this, is I remember, is from the Rocky films, where Rocky and Apollo Creed are on the beach, and at the start of the montage, Rocky is racing across the beach and Apollo Creed is yards ahead of him, and he's looking down and out and he can never do it. By the end of the montage and everything's picked up, Rocky has sailed past Apollo Creed, and it just shows the progression he's made. So Eilish is much like this. It's a technique used by filmmakers to create those scenes, to allow the audience to see what is happening. Okay, I often use this example in terms of drama, that a deaf person should be able to go to the theatre and understand what is happening through good acting. And I suppose this is something similar. A good filmmaker should be able to express the film without words, and this is what this does. Okay, so at Coney Island, she becomes nervous and anxious when she realises that she should have had her swimming costume under her clothes. But back in Ireland, she goes to the beach with the others, full of confidence, and it is clear the others are in awe of her. So that shows a quick progression. The nervousness in Coney Island, the calm and assured nature that she shows in Enniscorthy, because they're in awe of her. There's a sense of confidence there. The contrast between the quiet dunes of Enniscorthy and the packed Coney Island beach is clear, and Eilish is amused when Jim Farrell tells her that it will get busy later in the evening. Okay, and I suppose that's Eilish is kind of realising that Jim Farrell was, and like a lot of characters, were big fish in small pond, but Eilish has left that pond, and she is now understanding that life is so different in Coney Island, and she realises that the others don't realise that. They still think Enniscorthy, I suppose, is the centre of their world, where it is no longer the centre of her world. So continuing there, another key parallel scene occurs when Eilish returns to New York on the ship, just like she did at the beginning of the film. You'll remember at the beginning, she went onto the ship and she's waving goodbye to her mother. She's nervous, she's shy, and she meets a confident woman on the ship who's able to give her advice, tells her to wear makeup, gets her through immigration. And I suppose it's clear by the end of the film she has turned into the confident woman, and she's now giving advice to a young Irish girl who is nervous and shy, which reminds us of Eilish at the beginning of the film and highlights how far she has come over the course of the film. Eilish is contrasted a lot throughout the film with different characters. She's contrasted with Nancy at the beginning. Nancy was willing to accept doing everything she could to catch George Sheridan because, as Eilish put it, he had a shop in the square that he was going to inherit. She's then contrasted with the young woman on the ship, and at the end she's contrasted with the young nervous girl. And all of these contrasts, all these foils are used to show the stages that Eilish is at this point in the film. Okay, so she gives the girls the same advice that she received from the confident young woman who helped Eilish on the first journey, and it is clear to the audience that Eilish is now a smartly dressed and elegant young woman. Her transformation is complete and she is now at home in Brooklyn. Okay, creation of character is probably the most important part of stories. You can have a great plot and you can have a great story, but if you don't have memorable characters or intriguing or interesting characters, your story is going to fall down. So dialogue is an effective tool of the director in creating memorable characters in the film. The way Miss Kelly speaks to Mrs. Brady when she comes into the shop show that Mrs. Brady is thought of highly because of her social status. She uses a deferential tone when Mrs. Brady comes into the shop, as if she accepts that Mrs. Brady is better than her and the rest of the customers. She serves her first. You'll remember from a cultural context, she lets her skip the queue because of her social status. But the way she speaks to her also shows what she thinks of her. It also shows the type of person Miss Kelly is, because we then compare to the way she speaks to the woman who asks for polish. Miss Kelly uses language as a weapon and enjoys the hold she has over people. The hold she thinks, I suppose, has over people. In one of the closing scenes, when she tries to embarrass Eilish, she is stunned when Eilish stands up to her and says, "My name is Eilish Fiorello." Unused to being stood up to, she doesn't know what to do when her powers for gossip are reduced to nothing. Okay, and here's another example of, I suppose, parallel scenes. Eilish would never have spoken to Miss Kelly in that tone had she still been working there. But she doesn't care. She just stands up. And the way she said it wasn't just what she said, it's how she said it. So dialogue's really important in the character progression of Eilish there as well. Okay, the dialogue between Eilish and Tony tells us a lot about their personalities. It is clear that Eilish is more educated and a faster thinker than Tony when she quizzes him about going to the Irish dance. So yeah, she can run rings around him verbally. She makes fun of him, even though he doesn't realise it, and it shows her sense of humour, but it also shows the fact that there's a wide gap in terms of their education. But in Ireland that would have been a problem, but despite the inequality, the couple get on really well, but it is clear that both characters are kind-hearted and accept each other the way they are. The director uses contrast in the creation of characters. Eilish is contrasted with Nancy at the beginning of the film, the confident young woman on the ship, and later in the film, the young nervous girl. These contrasts highlight the progression of Eilish throughout the film. Tony is contrasted with Jim Farrell. He has less education, doesn't come from a wealthy background, but has a desire to create a good life for himself through hard work and perseverance. Now, that's a big difference between America and Ireland. Hard work and perseverance still wouldn't have got you far in Ireland. You needed to have come from a good family name, or your family would have had to have money in order for you to progress. But in America, everyone had that opportunity. Okay, probably the most important part of literary genre, I think, in terms of answering your question, is imagery and symbolism. And it's really easy to pick the symbols in all three texts. Now, the first one we're going to look at is light v darkness, and it's used to great effect in the film. At the beginning of the film, as Eilish makes her way to Mass, the scene is very dark with a dimly lit church. Life in Ireland is seen as dark and depressing, symbolising the lack of opportunity. Even the dinners at home with her mum and Rose, it's really dark. It's symbolising the darkness and depression of living in Ireland, where there are no opportunities for young people. Okay, so, and it's important that the director did this at the very beginning, because then when she arrives in Brooklyn, just as she steps through the immigration check, there is a blinding light. And you know yourself, if you're sitting in the dark for a half an hour and then the next thing a blinding light comes on, it has more impact. So the blinding light, and we see her move towards the light. And that's important symbolically, that she's moving towards the light. She's not put off by it. She's moving towards it. She wants to go to the light, leaving the darkness behind, symbolizing her move to a new and vibrant place full of opportunity and hope. So just as she steps through that door, and the door is very symbolic as well, because you can contrast that with the door in A Doll's House, where Nora walks through, exiting. She's walking out the door, whereas Eilish is walking towards the door, opening it up. She wants to go through the door. Okay, so a great contrast there if you're talking about techniques. Okay, so the happier Eilish is in the film, the brighter the scenes. Okay, so I suppose there's a sense of pathetic fallacy there, in that the weather and the scenery is dictated by Eilish's happiness. Okay, in her bout of homesickness, the scenes darken a little, but when she and Tony go to Coney Island, we see a happy Eilish basking in the warm sunshine. When she's advising the young girl at the end of the film, she tells her that one day the sun will come out. And that's a metaphor. She's not talking about the weather there. She's talking about, she knows this young girl is going to have homesickness, but she tells her that one day the sun will come out. And for Eilish, the sun did come out, and her life changed dramatically. Okay, and the relationship with Tony and her night classes, all of that combined made her understand that her life was now in Brooklyn. Eilish's clothes play an important part in symbolising her character progression. At the beginning, she goes to a dance and wears her least flattering dress, as she sees no point in making an effort when she's moving away. We also see how little clothes she has when she's packing to leave. Rose tells her that this represents the limited opportunities here in Ireland. Rose tells her that she would have bought her more clothes, but she said she couldn't buy her the kind of life she needed. So instead, she got Father Flood to do it again. So the clothes at the beginning represent Eilish in terms of a character progression. Eilish doesn't have many clothes, but as she goes through and grows more confident, we see her clothes change. We see the suitcase is much fuller on her second return. Eilish's growing confidence is symbolised by her clothes when she comes home after Rose's death. Nancy comments that she looks so glamorous, and her mother's really proud when she says that as well. And I suppose at the beginning of the film, she's not glamorous. Nancy would have been deemed to be more glamorous than her, but now the roles have reversed. The boys in the rugby club also view clothing as a status symbol, a way to express membership of an elite group. Jim stops doing this when Eilish criticises the way the boys dress and act. Okay, so that's imagery and symbolism. So we'll go back over. So we looked at the title, we looked at the point of view, we looked at character creation, we looked at the plot narrative pattern, and we looked at imagery and symbolism. Later in the week, you will be getting videos on A Doll's House and The Great Gatsby. Any questions, please contact me. Again, if anyone else wants to subscribe to the channel, there will be more Leave Insert English content in the coming days and weeks. Thank you.